Have you ever thought about doing speedruns yourself? Let's take a look at the preparation of what it takes to be competitive in speedrunning. First of all, you need to find a guild, and the recruitment is a bit different for speedrunning guilds, as most require players to have a geared alt character to participate in split raids, which is a concept coming from retail and means they divide the main characters into several different raids and fill with the other alt characters so that they can prioritize the main characters with the big item drops so that they can all come together during the actual main raid ones and have as much gear as possible. Many think of this as a tedious process, but as with any competition, every advantage is being used. Another extreme that Classic has become known for is the collection of world buffs. But what do they do and how do you get them? There are 8 world buffs in total, and most of them are rather straightforward, like picking flowers in Fairless or putting a dragon's head on display for the whole city to see in Orgrimmar or Stormwind. But what about some of the more tricky ones, such as Warchief's Blessing and the Darkmoon Fair buff? So for Warchief's Blessing, it's only given out to Horde players, and it's only given out to Horde players in Orgrimmar or in the Crossroads. This is done from turning in a quest after you finish Ubers. However, Alliance players have found out that they can get this buff, which gives them extra HP, melee haste, and mana regen, by getting mind controlled by a Horde priest, or with clever use of an engineering helmet that also has a mind control effect. The Darkmoon Fair buff, however, is extremely important to the extent that guilds change their raid times completely to be able to match with the event. The fair starts building over the first Friday of the month, and then it actually starts on the very first Monday of each month, and then it is only there for exactly 1 week until the next Monday. NA guilds then have 1 day to get the buff and do a raid before starting their next lockout, and EU guilds have 2 days. But guilds can actually get 3 uses out of this buff by using that first day and then getting the buff again and going back in on their normal raid times, and then logging their character by getting the buff 1 more time and just staying logged out until their raid the next week. Getting the buff is a challenge of its own, as its location alternates between Mulgore and Elwyn Forest, forcing people of the opposing faction to travel into dangerous territories, but considering the power of the 10% increased damage, it is a must-have. The trip can be a logistical challenge as well, and it must be carefully planned. As with almost every server, there's going to be numerous people of the opposing faction camping out at the NPC just waiting to kill people trying to get this buff. One of which is one of the most reliable, is using an invisibility potion along with a flask of petrification and a clever use of battleground mechanics. So if you queue up for a battleground and then wait for the queue to be ready, you can take the invis pot, run up to the NPC, and then pop the petrification flask. When you have this flask popped, no one can hurt you, no one can actually do anything to you, but you can still respond to things. So you can talk to the NPC while you're still in the flask of petrification, and you're immune to quite literally anything else. Then you accept the battleground queue and then just AFK out, and you're safely back in whichever city you decided to take the queue from. Getting to the raid is the next challenge, after acquiring all the buffs and without facing the opposing faction. To do this, guilds find secret and discreet summoning locations, and they keep their raid times secret. For this competition, we can expect that all of the traveling time is done several hours or even days before the time slot to avoid griefing. PTR is another topic that's very relevant and a hot topic recently for speedrunning guilds, as the servers went up in January and they allow for basically infinite tries and practice. Each guild dedicates different amounts of time to the PTR, and it can vary anything between 10 to over 100 hours of practice runs. However, it's not as easy as just plug and play, as the players do have to make their live server characters fully raid ready with full buffs before they copy over to the public test realm. Gold is another factor that contributes to the success of a speedrun. There are a lot of consumables in Classic for every class, and each guild will require every raider to have a surplus of these consumables each raid. These range from things like Flask of the Titans or Flask of Supreme Power, which can be up to 500 gold on different servers, Also things like Winterfall Firepower, or in most of these speedruns, things like Jujus. Then we'll need potions, free action potions, limited invulnerability potions, greater stone shield potions, and more. As you can see, these things add up. Raiding in one of these speedruns on a high pop server can have each raider spending more than 500 to 1,000 gold per raid. To have this much gold, a lot of different players take different approaches, such as boosting or making gold DKP runs. The latter is a concept about running the raid with mostly carries or usually guild members, and then making sure that you invite buyers, who are people that you know for a fact have a lot of gold and will be spending it on specific items. During the run, all of the items are collected, and once the run is concluded, the items get auctioned off to the highest bidder. Gold pools in one run can range anywhere between 80,000 gold to over 400,000 gold and beyond. So with this amount of gold being split up, not evenly, but at a good amount, you can see that people are making a lot of gold just by doing the raid itself on one of their alts. Raid ID fishing has also become standard practices in speedrun guilds, which is all about trying to get a raid ID or an instance ID with as few hard trash mobs as possible. For example, in AQ40, priests would use mind vision on Cthulhu from the entrance by using a macro and a little help of add-ons that helped them figure out if it was actually going to be a good ID. However, in Naxxramas, this is not necessary, as the level of difficulty that you can find by finding a new ID doesn't actually end up saving very much time. These are all different things that go into all of the preparation just to be ready to even enter into the raid itself and attempt a speedrun. All of the top guilds have all of their raiders committed to doing everything they can to make sure that they can shave off as much time as possible.